Welcome back. We're going to shift our conversation now to talk about social media. Now, there's been a lot of talk for a couple of months, if not years now, about social media bill sitting at the National Assembly. The Minister of Information has consistently talked about the fact that he would be in support of regulating social media. We even had a conversation or a deliberation at the Lagos State House of Assembly around talking about what social media can do and why there might be a need to sort of start regulating things in that space. A lot of Nigerians, of course, have met these conversations with a lot of resistance. And I have, as my guest, Kelvin Odan's joining us from our Abuja studio. Kelvin, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Good afternoon, Ebuka. How are you?
Thank you very much for joining us. So this talk about this bill doesn't seem to be going away. And we've heard the Minister of Information, who literally is at the top of all of this, still talk about it almost week in, week out. And it's gotten even louder since, the NSAS protest started. But there's also the talk about, from the National Assembly that this bill is not about social media regulation, that is people need to look at the entirety of the body of work and why we might need that. What are your thoughts on all of this?
I think what I see is fear, basically. Over time, traditionally, I think Nigerians, we've always been these docile and resistant people. And I think in recent times, let's say in the last 5 years, people are beginning to realize the power of social media and how it is bringing about a sort of awakening in the Nigerian youth and how much it's affecting politics and elections, especially from the 2015. And with what happened in the US, the impact of social media in the US election and in the Nigerian election and stuff like that. So I think, and then it culminated with the NSAS protests, basically. The elites, the ruling elites are kind of scared, seeing how much Nigerian youth have been able to come together in an coordinated way, kind of, to challenge the status quo, they've been neglecting social media. It has always been this thing about, like, they felt like social media is just basically what young people, youth, jobless youth, holding their phones, pressing their laptops. But then they are seeing how much it is actually creating meaningful conversations, like drawing attention to the things happening in the country and educating ordinary citizens, something that has never happened before. People are becoming knowledgeable about governance, their rights, and they are having the guts to speak up, to challenge the status quo, basically. So what I see is just basically fear that this thing can lead to a toppling, not the toppling of the government, but let me use the word toppling of the old guard, those who have held this country hostage for a while. People are seeing, they are seeing the possibility of this thing going, shall I use the word, overboard, getting to the point where they might not be able to retain their hold on power. So this whole conversation around social media bill is just basically trying to curb it or nip it in the bud, while they feel like it's something that is still growing up at this point in time, and they want to shut it down or limit its effect or diminish its effects before it gets maybe overboard for them. I think that's what it's all about.
The counter argument, especially in the recent past, last week especially, has been the talk about fake news. There was a lot of conversations about how things were just put out there on social media, unverified, that may have triggered what we saw across the country with lootings and just wanton destruction of property. So fake news is not just a Nigerian thing. We've known that across the world, it's always been an issue people have been trying to tackle. So is that not a valid reason, thinking as government now, to start looking at social media more seriously and finding a way to regulate things that are put on there?
Okay, I think I feel it's the responsibility of social media corporations or tech companies, the Google, the Twitter, the Facebook, to actually regulate the infiltration of fake news or the propagation of fake news on social media. And they've been doing that. They've been building, tweaking the technology itself to combat fake news on social media. But then when you talk about fake news, to be honest, I feel it is relative. You understand? So I want to give an instance. On October 20th, when we had that Lekki massacre, the army denied that they weren't there. You understand? That's fake news itself. You understand? And anybody who actually said that the army were there were actually accused of being the propagators of fake news. And over time, the narrative changed. We had hard evidence, tangible evidence that they were actually there. We had video evidence, audio, pictures that they were there. And then the propagators of fake news moved from we, who were actually pointing out the fact, to the government, who were trying to hide the fact. So fake news is relative. So I think that's just a fear, especially in Nigeria, where we know that we have a political institution that we can't trust. It is just going to be an issue of the government using fake news as a disguise to witch hunt people who are trying to hold them accountable, who are trying to point out their wrongdoings, who are trying to poke holes into whatever it is they are doing, their mischievousness kind of a thing. So if we want to cop fake news, let's not leave much of it to tech companies, the Facebook, the Twitter, the Google. We should leave much of it to them to actually do the curbing. And of course, I also believe. I want
to cross over now
to
maybe Miriam Laushi, who's joining us. Sorry, I'll come back to you, Kelvin. But I want to cross to Miriam Laushi, who's also joining us from Abuja. Miriam, thanks for joining us. And I want to talk about free speech now, because that's the argument a lot of people who are social media users keep saying. We have a right to free speech to air our views. But I always like to throw the counter argument in there. If you're freely speaking your mind on the streets or to people around you, it's seen as a different dynamic as against when you're on social media and your voice can be amplified. I mean, we've seen cases, especially in the last couple of days, where sort of religion and tribal sentiments have been whipped up by certain people just by putting things out there. And isn't that a viable reason, for example, to say, okay, let's look at how to control the space?
So, fair enough, there have been people who use fake news as a tool to disrupt peace and to disrupt, how people are operating at different levels. But the social media bill in itself actually makes so many provisions that are limiting to a person's free speech. So, for example, they have parts of the bill that talks about access blocking order, that talks about internet access, which should never be tampered with, especially in a country that we believe to be democratic. If the government wants to deal with the issue of fake news, then they need to deal with it holistically, because there are aspects of social media that they cannot control. For example, WhatsApp. Those are more private platforms, but there's a lot of fake news that is being spread there. If they want to deal with it, they have to deal with it from the root cause. That is giving people access to information and access to the truth. For example, now on Twitter, there's a new feature that says you shouldn't retweet. Once you try to retweet without opening an article, it tells you to first read the article. And that is a very proactive way of dealing with the issue of spreading fake news or using sentiment to affect people. There should be an effort on the part of the government to make sure that there are more fact-checking branches in every organization. Every government organization should have a department for fact-checking. They should constantly overflow social media with a lot of that fact-checking. But recently, we also saw a government institution come out to say that something that actually happened was fake news, and they've since retracted that statement and made a different statement. And some of the punishments for some of these things are very huge: fines, imprisonment, and all of that. So for somebody who has put out news that is true and the government comes out to say that it's fake, bear in mind the bill actually has a place that talks about making the public lose trust in government by your online declarations. That's very dangerous. It's very murky. And so once the government is able to put out the truth through all their organizations, make sure that they're available online for the communities that are online so that they have access to information and the truth, then they can deal with it from the root cause, as opposed to trying to shut people's access to information and also freedom of free speech.
So what can Nigerians do? Because, I mean, if this bill gets passed, it's going to become law. And then once it's law, I mean, there's really nothing anybody can do about it. What can the average Nigerian start to do to advocate? I mean, people who are like you, who are probably advocates of free speech. What should we be doing right now?
So the first thing that we should do, because we have our representatives at the National Assembly and at our state assemblies as well, we need to get their contacts and we need to reach them with calls, text, emails. And on shineyoureye.org, there are lists of your representatives. If you don't know who your representative is, you can find that information and how to contact them. They're there to speak for us. And the will of the people is that social media should not be shut. And so in that case, an average Nigerian can do their best by making sure they reach out to their representative to express their opinions about not banning social media so that their representative can make that stance known when they are making deliberations about this law. And we can also use all our platforms, whether it's mass media, social media, WhatsApp groups, reaching each other and letting each other know why it's important for free speech to be and to be free for people in Nigeria, for people to say what they need to say, and also to hold government accountable or any other issue organization accountable through the social space.
Okay, I'll come back to you, Miriam, but let me go back to Kelvin Odans, who's in our Abuja studio. Kelvin, same thing I asked her, should Nigerians be worried?
Yeah, I think Nigerians should be worried because we have a government that is high-handed in dealing with its citizens. You understand? So it is something very, very worrisome, and it calls for Nigerians coming together, just like we've seen in the past few weeks, coming together, creating alliances, collaborations, and sharing, educating themselves more about the social media bill and how they can go against it, or how they can actually combat it, or address it with their representatives. So,
whatsoever, any at all, you know, for regulating social media, you think by government, any at all?
Okay, no, I'm not absolutely against any form of regulation for social media. You understand? I'm not absolutely against it. So. The thing with this current social media bill is that it is vague. You understand? Like it has so many gray areas. For instance, who determines what is fake news? At what point does a fake news get acknowledged to be actually facts, to be actually true? And if a government organization is responsible for spreading fake news, what is the punishment and stuff like that? So this the current bill is mostly protecting the government against criticism, protecting the government against being challenged, being held accountable for their responsibilities. So if these laws can be broken down into bits in a way that is very specific, you understand, and it is very transparent, and it doesn't give all the power to the regulators, which is the government in this case. And of course, the law has like a medium to partner with the social media companies in a way, in terms of fact checking, and then addressing the process. Is the process that is actually the issue here, because it's too vague, you understand? I mean, like, we've had instances where a government organization brought out a particular news, or, released a particular news, and then people went around it and discovered that this is actually fake, and there wasn't any kind of punishment around that, or where something came up and then they said it's fake news, and over time, like 2-3 days later, people actually know that this is actually true, and then stuff like that. So if we have an atmosphere of transparency, where people know, like, the laws or the bills or the articles of the bill are very, very specific, you understand, so that everybody on social media, or Nigerian youth who are using social media, know exactly the punishment for spreading fake news. And they shouldn't be like high-handed. I mean, I think there was a part, the one with the hate speech that even had like death penalty on it, life imprisonment, stuff like that. Like, they are too high-handed. So if the law isn't high-handed and if it isn't as vague and filled with gray areas, yeah, I think we should actually advocate for something like that to just curb it a bit, like the proliferation of fake news on the internet.
Okay, I'll go back to Miriam now. Miriam, how do we start to tackle, because we all must agree that fake news is a problem. And even I have been guilty of being a recipient of it, you know, but that's besides the point. How do we start to proactively tackle that without it being a government-enforced thing?
So individually, all of us have a responsibility to make sure that we don't spread fake news. So one thing that we can do is when we receive information, we see an article, or we see a tweet posted about something, or receive a broadcast on WhatsApp, let's try to use Google. Let's try to find out, is the information in here valid before we begin to spread that information that we received. When we see a tweet and there's no reference to it, it's just a person's personal opinion, and we're not sure of that, we can use Google to look at images that have been shared. Multiple times online, I've seen people share an image and say it happened somewhere. Meanwhile, it happened somewhere in Nigeria. Meanwhile, it happened, you know, somewhere else in the world. And so we have a responsibility as citizens who use the social media platforms to make sure that we don't foster or encourage the spread. And there are fact-checking platforms. I can't think of one immediately right now, but I've come across a few. And through those platforms, we're able to also confirm the news that we've received. So I think these are the things that we should do. And whenever we find fake news, one thing that I always do is I report the tweet. As long as I know it's fake, whatever is coming out from that account is fake, I report the account, I report the tweet or the post, and that helps because some of these platforms actually have checks, and they either delete the tweet or shut down the account or the post in that time once they receive the complaint and they've reviewed it. So those are the roles that we can take personally, and we can also, as you know, people who care about these things begin to come together as groups to create fact-checking platforms as well for people, so that whenever someone is lost, confused, or unsure of certain news, they can go through that platform and make sure that the information that they get is correct.
Just very quickly now in one sentence, I mean, Kelvin had mentioned there that a lot of this responsibility should be put on the app, you know, developers. You know, Facebook has a plethora of cases around the world now for so many things. Do you think they have the capacity to do this?
I think that they do have a role to play, and we are beginning to see them play that role through how they, especially on Twitter. I think I just have to say that Twitter is doing a really good job in trying to tackle the issue, but the responsibility isn't only on them. I think for those of us who use the platform, it's just like being free as a citizen. Yes, we have a right to be free, but that also means we have the responsibility to do what's right and not cause harm to other people. And so in that process, we have to make sure that we take our own part of the responsibility in making sure that we don't spread fake news and we stop others around us from spreading fake news, while the platforms themselves can also put measures in place to make sure that they deal with the issue.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me finally from Kelvin now. This law seems to be very, very popular with politicians. The Minister of Information goes on and on about it. You're still at the National Assembly. We saw recently the Lagos State House of Assembly talk extensively about, you know, social media regulation. It looks like a very uphill task for Nigerians, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the uproar. I mean, everybody's running frantically in the corridor of power because
okay.
I think the NSAS protest is actually like it's actually like the highlight of the power of social media. And then let's be honest, it was using social media for good. You understand? Educating Nigerians about their rights, not to be brutalized by the police, and then telling them what to actually do, like go on the street.
So it is a tough fight to
the
have in our
government
hands,
to actually reform the police and stuff. And people, people are beginning to have conversations. You understand, like the way forward in terms of.
Sorry, very sorry to cut you there.
In terms of
we need to go on. We need to go on a quick break now. Sorry, very sorry there, Kelvin. But I think I get your points. We do have a very tough fight in our hands, and we're going to keep watching the space. Thank you very much, Kelvin. Thank you very much, Miriam Laoshi, for joining us. We'll take a break now. Don't go away.